Let's have a talk about economic supply and demand. If you think you're the first person in the world that's ever thought to themselves, I wonder what the fair value of an asset is, you are clearly insane. The entire field of finance and the entire academic field of finance has been working on this problem feverishly for hundreds of years. It seems like that at least. And as an example, you can see here on the screen, we have a big long list of formulas. This is only a fraction of the mathematical brainpower required to find the fair value of assets in the traditional markets. Most of these are most appropriate for bonds. However, they can also be used for stocks as well. The catch is that most of the valuation that happens in the traditional financial world happens from cash flows, which is a way of saying if we have something that gives us money, then we can use that rate of income to value that asset over the long run, using interest rates and opportunity costs and other things like this. The problem is because Bitcoin, as we know, doesn't give you money itself. Holding the asset doesn't pay you a dividend, you don't get claims to anything else. It's only the miners that have a rate of return on their mining activities in the form of Bitcoin, but even then the price of Bitcoin moves around. So we have to look outside of traditional finance to find methods of fairly valuing Bitcoin. Obviously, this is incredibly difficult, but there are some ways of looking at it. This problem hasn't been solved completely. However, there's a few mindsets, there's a few frameworks we can use to better understand the dynamics that are happening behind the scenes. So let's look at a couple of them. The highest level concepts of price analysis really have been studied by economists for hundreds of years as well. And really everything comes down to supply and demand. If demand increases, prices go up. If supply increases, prices go down. It's the interaction between these two that determines the equilibrium price in the market. What we have here on the screen right now is a basic example of a supply and demand chart. Now, you may have never seen one of these before. However, this is the fundamental concept in economics you need to understand in order to know what happens with price and quantity when you have changes in supply and demand. You can see that where supply and demand cross, this is called the market clearing price, or the equilibrium. This is where everybody agrees on the price that we need to pay for a certain quantity of goods. If we want to go more advanced, we can reduce the amounts of supply in the market. Now, what you can see when we shift the supply curve to the left, we have a reduction in quantity from Q1 to Q2, and what this does is it increases the equilibrium point on the demand curve. This raises the price from P1 to P2. This is only natural. This, if we have a reduction in supply, leads to an increase in price, but this actually visually shows you how it operates. Say in the market, if we have a different effect, say the increase in demand, you can see this reflected in the shifting of the demand curve. If we move the demand curve from D1 to D2, this is an increase in demand. We go from quantity 1 to quantity 2, and an increase in price from P1 and P2. So we know that prices can be set by supply and demand, and we know that Bitcoin has a certain price. But where does its demand come from? Isn't it just a piece of data on the internet? Well, it can be demanded as a speculative asset because, as we know, when its price goes up and it's the right time macroeconomically speaking, or at any other point in its cycle or time or whatever, it will make you money. Something that's going to make you money is obviously going to be very highly demanded. However, it does have value outside of that. It has a payments network, the Lightning Network. It can be used as a store of value. It can be used to move wealth from one location to another without it being censored or anything like this. We could talk all day about the merits of Bitcoin. That's not what this lecture is about. However, you can see that there are benefits to holding Bitcoin, and this is one of the reasons, or one of many reasons, it's demanded. So how do we measure demand in crypto? So we have a couple of different measurements. We can use the accumulation rate of cryptocurrencies to see how much they're being demanded. We can also use the implied relationship of demand, which is Metcalfe's law. Metcalfe's law describes how the value of a network is proportional to the square of the users. As something becomes exponentially more valuable, demand for it will increase. You can see here that as more people join the network, as participation increases in Bitcoin, we will have a rapid increase in demand for the network because other people are using it. That makes it more interesting, more valuable. It's a reinforcing relationship. This is why it's the square of the users and not just a linear relationship. Looking at the direct relationship for demand, which is accumulation, we have a couple of different charts to show you this. So we have the accumulation trend score from Glassnode. This is great because, as you can see, trend of the accumulation speed increasing towards 1. We can imply that maybe there's a higher demand for Bitcoin here versus at 0, where there is a lower demand, where there is maybe distribution happening, where there is people selling off their holdings or trying to get rid of them. You can look at this chart in your own time and see the correlation between the different areas. It's not always accurate, nothing is. However, it's interesting to see where the demand for Bitcoin is the highest during its history. This is a zoomed in version of that same chart. using a 7-day moving average of the accumulation trend score. You can see here that during the different crashes that we had, like the December 2018 crash, the March 2020 crash, the Lunar crash, and the FTX crash, we had a lot of different moments here where the price had gone down a lot. However, the accumulation was still very high. Very interesting to consider. Acting as a bridge between direct valuation and implied valuation, you could use number of addresses as an interesting metric. Here on this chart, you can see the amount of non-zero addresses is going exponential over the long run. This could be reflected as the amount of people who are using the Bitcoin network. They have lots of different wallets and they're trying to hold Bitcoin in lots of different areas. You could argue that this is a representation of how the network is being demanded. One of the reasons why you can kind of look at this is because at the 2018 peak, when the prices were going down a lot, you can see that the number of addresses also shrunk dramatically as well. Now let's look at the implied valuation, which is Metcalfe's law. I'm not going to show you how to perform the actual calculations. A lot of people find that very difficult or very confusing. There are a lot of different factors you can use to increase the quality of that measurement. We won't be going into that in this lecture. So on chart right now, you will see what is the best representation of Metcalfe's law versus Bitcoin price that I could find on the internet. It's an interesting relationship. It's not always very accurate. It's not always very useful. However, it does show you approximately that the network value is pretty close to the Metcalfe value. What we have in the following two charts is an interesting description of how the Bitcoin and Ethereum returns are related to their Metcalfe values over time. We can see that the future returns of both Bitcoin and Ethereum are somewhat related to their valuations to the Metcalfe law. If we have a very high valuation for Metcalfe, then that shows us that the future returns are likely to be very low. Conversely, if we have a very low value of the Metcalfe law, then that means the future returns of Bitcoin and Ethereum are likely going to be a lot higher. I believe this shows that, to some degree, there is alpha to be had in modeling the network demand for Bitcoin. So that was demand in crypto. But what about supply in crypto? We all know that only 21 million Bitcoins can ever be mined into existence. This rate of inflation of Bitcoin supply to the 21 million max cap is known in advance because it's hard-coded into the blockchain. This is also known out to infinity at the exact rate which it is going to happen. One of the interesting parts about this is because it's known to infinity and because the inflation rate is set, if people begin to lose more Bitcoin than they are able to mine, there is actually no way of inflating the Bitcoin supply, which means that it's going to be a store of value because it can't be arbitrarily inflated away. Furthermore, because its supply rates can be known out into the future, estimations and models can be created around the supply rate in order to make guesses about the future price behavior. The economic principle of total existing stock versus newly created units flowing into the market can be thought of total stock to newly created flow, or said in another way, as the stock to flow ratio. What you'll see on screen now is an early model of the stock to flow ratio of Bitcoin. As you can see, early models of the stock to flow ratio assumed an infinite amount of money available at all times, an infinite amount of possible energy consumption for the network, and a final BTC price of infinity once all block rewards were exhausted. Clearly, this is insane and not useful. Fortunately, other models took far more realistic and conservative estimates of these variables, such as the limited growth stock to flow ratio, highlighted here in the green. Since its inception, the model has done a decent job at estimating Bitcoin value as a function of its supply. Disclaimer, this limited growth stock to flow ratio is fantastic indeed. However, I do not have a live copy of it. Do not ask me to find it for you. I do not have it. This is a conceptual explanation only. If you want more information on this, I recommend you track down the author, Quant Mario, do some reading on his modeling, try and create it for yourself, because I don't have time. So clearly at this point, we've already looked at the demand and the supply side of the equations and how they can maybe be modeled to give you some signal into the market. Obviously, if you have confluence between these and you have the supply model telling you to go long and the demand model telling you to go long and they're happening at the same time, well, you'd probably want to go long. However, before you get a boner for the stock to flow ratio, I need to set your expectations because it's actually a very faulty model and there are a lot of problems with it, which I need to cover right now before anybody starts accusing me of excluding some of the largest faults of these models and why they cannot really be used, especially the original models. The limited growth stock to flow ratio, probably, but maybe not. Let's have a look at the criticisms and you can make that decision for yourself. Number one, stock to flow ratio does not have co-integration, meaning it cannot be proved whether it's true or false, statistically speaking. Number two, it's tautological. Stock multiplied by price equals stock to flow. This is like saying bananas are equal to bananas, with some extra variables added in there for measurement. So of course, there's going to be a spurious relationship of some sort induced into that relationship. Stock to flow does not work with other cryptos. Stock to flow ratio does not work universally on all commodities. Stock to flow doesn't even accurately measure the value of gold throughout its entire history, which is the very asset which the stock to flow ratio was really derived from to try and create a good valuation model for Bitcoin in the first place. After accounting for autocorrelation, the R squared of the stock to flow ratio to the price predictions is essentially zero. Now, supply and demand at the asset level. We all know that the Bitcoin supply is scheduled out into infinity, and the amount of supply is going down over time due to the halving events. Every 4 years, approximately, we have a halving event where the block reward is halved and the inflation rate is halved. This means that it's positive for Bitcoin, right? Because there's less supply being added, which is positive for price on average over the long run. However, it's also important to note that at the time of recording, there are many supply dynamics working in favor of Ethereum, actually over and above the effects that Bitcoin has, such as the burning of gas fees on the blockchain and staking as well, and the proof of stake mechanism that involves locking up these tokens so that they can't be in circulation in the market. If these effects stay consistent, it will be more bullish for Ethereum over the long run. So, in summary, the price of anything can be approximately derived at all times through the principles of supply and demand. Demand can be approximately derived from accumulation trends and network value modeling. Supply dynamics can be modeled using data taken directly from the BTC blockchain. Bitcoin market value cannot be accurately derived using the stock to flow ratio. The stock to flow ratio, while being conceptually correct and a good, useful philosophical model to look at and understand the use of the supply dynamics in the cryptocurrency market, it is not a sound model in econometrics or statistics and should be disregarded. With that, guys, thank you, and I'll talk to you in the next one.